fellow Americans.
You might be wondering, why in the world is there a 30-minute countdown before the show starts? Well, we actually start live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, so this whole 30-minute countdown is a chance for YouTube and Rumble to send out their alerts and notifications, so we encourage you to gather up and hang out with everyone in the chat room. So every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time is when we do this show live. You can join us for the countdown if you like, or just set your clock and reminder that at 4 p.m. Eastern is when we go live. You can also make sure you subscribe and turn on that bell notification, so hopefully you will get a notification.
What do you have to say about dictators of countries like Indonesia, who we sell weapons to, yet they are slaughtering people in East Timor? What do you have to say about Israel, who is slaughtering Palestinians, who impose martial law? What do you have to say about that? Those are our allies. Why do we sell weapons to these countries? Why do we support them? Why do we bomb Iraq when it commits similar problems?
There are various examples of things that are not right in this world, and the United States is trying. I really am surprised that people feel that it is necessary to defend the rights of Saddam Hussein, when what we ought to be thinking about is how to make sure that he does not use weapons of mass destruction.
I'd like to...
Who are shouting, just a moment.
I'm not defending him in the least. What I am saying is that there needs to be consistent application of U.S. foreign policy. We cannot support people who are committing the same violations because they are political allies. That is not acceptable. We cannot violate UN resolutions when it is convenient to us. You're not answering my question, Madam Albright.
You briefed the press, did you not, when you were there?
Well, I had several jobs. One of my jobs was that of analyst. I also was an interrogator and indeed briefed the press when we, the CIA, wanted to circulate disinformation on a particular issue. Disinformation is not necessarily a lie. It may be a half-truth. And we would pick out a journalist. I would go do the briefing and hope that he would put the information in print.
What was your percentage of success?
We were pretty successful in planning information of a rather rarefied nature. For instance, if we wanted to get across to the American public that the North Vietnamese were building up their force structure in South Vietnam, I would go to a journalist and advise him that in the past 6 months, X number of North Vietnamese forces had come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail system through southern Laos. Now, there is no way a journalist can check that information. That's data derived from radio intercepts, spy in the sky photography. So either he goes with the information or he doesn't, and ordinarily or usually the journalist would go with it because it looked like some kind of exclusive. Go after these gentlemen. I would be directed to cultivate them, to spend time with them at the Caravel Hotel or the Continental Hotel, to socialize with them, and slowly but surely to try to gain their confidence by dolloping out valid information which was true. And then I would drop into a conversation the data that we wanted to get across which might not be true. One piece of data, for instance, that we managed to plant in the New Yorker magazine had to do with a supposed North Vietnamese effort in 1973 to develop airfields along the border of South Vietnam. The reason we wanted to plant this information was that we were trying to persuade the U.S. Congress that Saigon should continue to get a great deal of aid, and that the North Vietnamese were the chief violators of the ceasefire accord. That was printed in the New Yorker magazine under the byline of Robert Chaplin, as indeed was a great deal of such information which we tried to circulate.
Frank, a two-part question. What were the objectives of or what was the objective of the CIA? What about the moral implications of what you were doing in feeding this information? Did the objective override the moral implications, moral problems?
Well, the objective of the agency in general is to generate intelligence and get it back to Washington, to get at the truth and make sure the policymakers understand it. When you plant disinformation, you are diverging from that objective, and I think probably in retrospect it was very counterproductive. I am, as an ex-CIA agent, opposed to the disinformation activities in which I was involved. I admit that I was involved, and I think it served no useful purpose. Propagandizing the American public or Congress is not the CIA's job. As to the morality of what the CIA was doing or that particular activity, the war was a very relative thing. It was a relativist environment, and morality seldom came into play when you were operating in the field. In my estimation, a CIA man should be amoral. That may sound pretty shocking to somebody, but what if my morality were that of a Nazi or agent, if you will? You wouldn't want me to be your intelligence officer. Keep the morals out of intelligence. Keep the truth in, and stay away from disinformation.
It would have been more appropriate for Mr. Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, to address this House according to Article 144, an article which was specifically designed to debate violations of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, which is clearly the case with Mr. Trudeau. Then again, a Prime Minister who openly admires the Chinese basic dictatorship, who tramples on fundamental rights by persecuting and criminalizing his own citizens as terrorists just because they dared to stand up to his perverted concept of democracy, should not be allowed to speak in this House at all. Mr. Trudeau, you are a disgrace for any democracy. Please spare us your presence. Thank you.
Colleagues, but the answer to war is not more war, it's peace. And peace isn't delivered by the barrel of a gun, it's delivered by diplomacy, by dialogue. You can wish away your continent's history, but we share a continent with Russia. We will sit down with Russia. There will be a negotiated peace, and this organization should be promoting it earlier rather than delaying it and making sure that more Ukrainians die. Your feigning of sympathy rings hollow. It makes me sick, to be honest with you.
we become involved when disinformation poses a threat to the security of our country. It is when there's a connectivity to a threat to our country. It could be a threat, a connectivity to violence. And what this working group does, is precisely what I would think you would want it to do, which is to take a look at the work, the disinformation work that our department has done and ask the following questions. Do we have policies? Do we have guardrails? Do we have standards?
But here's the problem.
Ensure,
We can't even agree. We can't even agree what disinformation is. You can't even agree that it was disinformation, that the Russians fed information to the Steele dossiers. You can't agree to that. How are we ever going to come to an agreement on what is disinformation so you can police it on social media?
Senator, I have 2 points, if I may finish. Number one, that what this working group does, because it's not an office, what this working group does is ensure that there are guardrails, definitions, standards to make sure that the free speech rights, the civil rights, civil liberties, and privacy rights of individuals.
So do you think COVID disinformation threatens our national security?
And number two, if I may, Senator, and number two, is it your proposition that when the cartels spread disinformation with respect to our immigration policies to try to lure vulnerable migrants to our border illegally?
I think you've got no idea what disinformation is, and I don't think the government's capable of it. Do you know who the greatest propagator of disinformation in the history of the world is? The U.S. government. Are you familiar with McNamara, the Pentagon Papers? Are you familiar with George W. Bush and the weapons of mass destruction? Are you familiar with Iran-Contra? I mean, think of all the debates and disputes we've had over the last 50 years in our country. We work them out by debating them. We don't work them out by the government being the arbiter. I don't want you guardrails. I want you to have nothing to do with speech. You think we can't determine, speech by traffickers is disinformation? You think the American people are so stupid they need you to tell them what the truth is? You can't even admit what the truth is with the Steele dossier. I don't trust government to figure out what the truth is. Government is largely disseminating disinformation.
Hey everyone, just as a reminder, our show starts at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, just a few minutes from now, but I should remind you that we have a daily newsletter. It's totally free. Natalie and I work very hard on it every morning over our cup of coffee, putting the stories together that we think are important that the mainstream media is going to ignore. All you need to do is go to our website. It's just redacted.inc. Put in your email address. We won't ever sell your email to anybody. And then you'll receive a welcome email. And all you need to do is verify that email, and 7 a.m. Eastern Time is when we send out our daily newsletter. And it's about 5 or 10 minutes in length that you can read it over your cup of coffee. And like I said, we cover 4 or 5 of the big stories of the day, plus a couple of things you might have missed while you were sleeping. We try to have some fun with it, add a little humor into it. And again, it's a great way to start off your morning. But it's also a great way for us to stay connected with you as well, because we've been banned and blocked on some of these platforms before, where we haven't been allowed to post anything, not even a community post. So the only way for us to stay connected with you is through our newsletter. We were able to send out a newsletter and say, hey everyone, we're blocked for the next week, and let you know what was actually going on with our show. Anyway, go to redacted.inc and sign up for the free newsletter, and it'll be posted first thing in the morning over your cup of coffee.
This is a bit of an aside, but in terms of how you think about problem sets, when I was a cadet, what's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was the CI director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire We had entire training courses.
We had a good discussion on ensuring global energy security and adequate oil supplies to support global economic growth. And that will begin shortly. I'm doing all I can to increase the supply for the United States of America, which I expect to happen. The Saudis share that urgency, and based on our discussions today, I expect we'll see further steps in the coming weeks.
Are you worried about
One of the hopeful things that I've discovered is that nearly every war that has started in the past 50 years has been a result of media lies. The media could have stopped it if they had searched deep enough. If they hadn't reprinted government propaganda, they could have stopped it. But what does that mean? Well, that means basically populations don't like wars. And populations have to be fooled into wars. Populations don't willingly and with open eyes go into a war. So if we have a good media environment, then we'll also have a peaceful environment.
Killed a million people in Iraq.
That is a separate...
You killed a million people in Iraq. It's incredible that you have the brass neck to be sitting here now urging another Iraq war.
George,
after
if
what
I
you've
was
already
still in
done.
Parliament, I...
There can be no doubt that Saddam Hussein has biological weapons and the capability to rapidly produce more, many more. And he has the ability to dispense these lethal poisons and diseases in ways that can cause massive death and destruction. If biological weapons seem too terrible to contemplate, chemical weapons are equally chilling. UNMOVIC already laid out much of this, and it is documented for all of us to read in UNSCOM's 1999 report on the subject. If we consider just one category of missing weaponry, 6,500 bombs from the Iran-Iraq war, UNMOVIC says the amount of chemical agent in them would be on the order of 1,000 tons. These quantities of chemical weapons are now unaccounted for. Dr. Blick says, quipped that, quote, mustard gas is not marmalade. You are supposed to know what you did with it. We believe Saddam Hussein knows what he did with it, and he has not come clean to the international community. We have evidence these weapons existed. What we don't have is evidence from Iraq that they have been destroyed or where they are. That is what we are still waiting for.
Okay, inspection worth doing, everybody's agreed it's worth doing, and it gets stopped.
Yes, sir.
At that moment, we're an automatic pilot as far as you're concerned. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, I respect that. But now, it seems to me the Secretary of State might have a slightly different problem. Secretary of State might be sitting there and saying, now look over there on that side. Now, I remember so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and the 12 people on this side, they're all the ones that said they didn't want to use force. Now, I'm going to have to go tell the president now that we should, or Secretary Cohen, unleash whatever it takes to get it done. And our military assessment is the same as the majors. The majors' assessment is, privately held but publicly acknowledged later, that airstrikes alone aren't going to do this. Saddam's not going to cave on this. So, now here's the deal. I recommended the president have at it and let the chips fall where they may. A reasonable position for the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State to take. But I respectfully suggest, Major, I respectfully suggest they have a responsibility slightly above your pay grade. Slightly above your pay grade. To decide whether or not to take the nation to war alone. Or to take the nation to war partway. Or to take the nation to war halfway. That's a real tough decision. That's why they get paid the big bucks. That's why they get the limos and you don't. I mean this sincerely. I'm not trying to be flip. Because I think, and that's why I said at the outset, the reason why I'm glad you did what you did, we should come to our milk. We should make a decision. But in terms of whether the Secretary of State has no more to consider than you do as the arms inspector, you didn't get in, didn't get my job done, get me in. Period. You made the deal, right? That's the deal. A deal's a deal. Get me in. Scott Ritter, I'm ready to go. It's not how it works. Now, maybe it should work that way. But wouldn't you acknowledge that if you were President of the United States or the Secretary of State, you'd sit there and say, now, okay, old Scotty boy didn't get in. We said he should get in. We want him to get in. It's important that he does get in. They're not going to let him in, so what are we going to do now? We know that France and Russia aren't going to be with us. We're quite confident China's not. We've already run those traps. They're not there. We're not sure where the United States Senate is, but have at it, boys. Go get them. And by the way, Scott and the boys say air power's not enough. I think it's a legitimate debate, Scott, Major. I think it's a legitimate debate. But I don't think we should be putting it in the context of you have somebody up there at state saying, look, how can we weasel out of this agreement? We want to let this guy out there hanging. We're not this. It's a very practical political decision. Same kind of decision General Powell made. Same kind of decision President Bush made. Every president, every Secretary of State has to do it. Like I said, they get paid more than you. Their job's a hell of a lot more complicated than yours. They may have made the wrong decision, and you brought it to light. We should address it. We should say straight up where we are, and we should do it. And for that, I thank you. But it's above your pay grade.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon, and one of the generals called me in. He said, sir, you got to come in and talk to me a sec. He says, we've made the decision we're going to war with Iraq. I said, we're going to war with Iraq? Why? He said, I don't know. He said, I guess they don't know what else to do. He said, I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we got a good military and we can take down governments. And he said, I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail. So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper. He said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
Hey Hey everyone, Clayton here. The show is going to start at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. I should remind you that we have a VIP community. It's our Redacted Rebel VIP community. Now, this show is totally free, what you're watching right now, right? You can subscribe here on YouTube and Rumble, totally free. But if you'd like to support independent journalism, we are run by you. Without you guys, we wouldn't be able to do this show. We wouldn't be able to hire the team that we have. We wouldn't be able to afford the servers that we have. We wouldn't be able to afford the reporters that we have, the team that we have. So you can support us by going to redacted.inc, and on the right side of your screen, you'll see a VIP community button. Just click that, and for the price of a cup of coffee once a month, you can support us. We put out exclusive content, early interviews that no one else will see, live streams just for our VIP Rebel community. So again, it's totally free to watch this show. But if you do want to support independent journalism, we would really appreciate it. Come on over to redacted.inc, click on that community button, and decide if you want to sign up or not. It's totally up to you. We thank you. And meanwhile, the show will start in just a few moments at 4 p.m. Eastern Time.
Whatever our hopes may be for the future, for reducing this threat or living with it, there is no escaping either the gravity or the totality of its challenge to our survival and to our security. A challenge that confronts us in unaccustomed ways in every sphere of human activity. This deadly challenge imposes upon our society two requirements of direct concern, both to the press and to the President. Two requirements that may seem almost contradictory in tone, but which must be reconciled and fulfilled if we are to meet this national peril. I refer first to the need for far greater public information, and second, to the need for far greater official secrecy. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
And we are live, everybody. Welcome into Redacted. I'm Clayton Morris.
I'm Natali Morris.
And on this show, we tend to cover the stories the mainstream media largely ignores. Let us know where you're joining us from around the world. Please say hello if you're new here. Nice to see everyone on this Tuesday, on this Taco Tuesday. We've got a lot of news to get to. Of course, the beating of the war drums at the Pentagon continues despite no evidence that Iran was involved in the attack that killed 3 American soldiers. We're getting more details and some fishy details, actually, about how this whole thing unfolded, but we will bring you that.
We're also going to talk about a NATO army because NATO heads are saying they need a Schengen army, not just to, trade bombs and bullets, but also people. This seems to be another way to get a European-wide army, pull the UK back into Europe, maybe not for trading bread, but bullets. Yes, we're going to invite Jim Ferguson on, politician, to talk about this, something we've been warning about.
Yeah, that's right. We're also going to talk about, well, something very interesting has been happening, and it's been happening over the past 2 years. Is there anything you guys can think of that's been happening over the past 2 years, and why in the world would embalmers, yes, people that prepare bodies around the world, are seeing something very startling when they are putting a body out to prepare it for a funeral service? And this is happening all around the world. We'll tell you about that. Is there anything that happened in the past 2 years that could be tying all of this together?
Well,
I don't know.
My subject today on Canadian hate science goes hand in hand with that, my friend. We have an author coming up, author of a book called Fissman's Fraud, about the hate science behind why Canadian politicians did what they did during the pandemic. I'm fired up about this book, you guys. Read it over the weekend. I want you to see this. I want you to see this.
I thought maybe
read the book and get fired up with me. Yeah.
I thought maybe
ahead.
you were talking about Taylor Swift's, in her career just completely taken off in the last 2 years. Is that what you're referring to, maybe?
Oh, that?
No, but I know where your head is at. We'll try to fix his head as Redacted starts right now.
Out David during that music was stretching like this. Like I saw him stretching and then flexing, and I love it.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, if you're sitting at a computer, you gotta work them out.
Let's all.
You gotta work them out. I was just lifting weights before the show. Where's the gym? Oh,
you're busted, and I like it. So everybody, do a little stretching. Take your multivitamin because Redacted is on fire today.
Anybody know where the vet is? Because I got a couple sick pythons.
All right.
Right.
Hey, we've got a busy show for you. Scott Ritter is going to be joining us here in a few moments, and we're going to be talking with him about what's going on in Iran. And because we got some new updated information on Iran's nuclear program from a former UN weapons inspector who's saying, yes, Iran is ready. They have nuclear weapons right now. So we're going to ask Scott Ritter about that, former UN weapons inspector, in just a moment. But first, let me tell you about our newsletter. So if you'd like to subscribe to our daily newsletter, you can do that. It's the best newsletter in the world. I got a nice email from one of our listeners today and said, hey, I've been watching you for a long time. I finally signed up for the newsletter, and I have to say, wow, it's on point. It was really well written. It made me laugh, and I felt really informed. It was a very nice email, so thank you so much. That's what we try to do. Every morning you get the Redacted newsletter sent right to your inbox. We cover about 4 or 5 of the big stories of the day. Natali and I write it ourselves. We don't have a team of people. It's just us, and we kind of go through and find the stories we think are most important to start your day. Some things you might have missed while you were sleeping. We give you some market updates, some news about what's going on with gold, silver, what's happening in the markets, and Bitcoin, and all of that. Just, if you invest in those things. And then you're off to the races. You can start your day. Anyway, it's totally free. Just go to redacted.inc, put in your email address, and you'll receive a welcome email. It might go to your spam folder. So just grab that, bring it over to your inbox. So Wednesday morning is the first morning that you'll get the newsletter. Again, once again, just go to redacted.inc. Well, Iran has enough uranium to make 12 nuclear bombs in 5 months, warns a former UN weapons inspector, David Albright. And the Biden administration appears ready to do whatever it takes to silence Iran with the help of members of the United States Congress, who are, of course, banging the drums for war, have already given the president authorization to attack Iran. And of course, this goes back to 2002 and even before that, the idea of hitting Iran preemptively. Israel has been pushing for this for decades. Here's Benjamin Netanyahu sitting in front of the United States Congress when Dennis Kucinich asks him this question about preemption. Listen.
You talked about a network of terror. Are there any other nations that you would recommend that the United States launch preemptive attacks upon at this point?
No, the issue is not. First of all, are there other nations that are developing nuclear weapons? Yes.
Should we launch any other preemptive attacks?
First, let me say what they are, and then let me make a suggestion how to proceed.
Thank you.
The answer is categorically yes. The two nations that are competing with each other, who will be the first to achieve nuclear weapons, is Iraq and Iran. And Iran, by the way, is also outpacing Iraq in the development of ballistic missile systems that they hope will reach the eastern seaboard of the United States within 15 years. So I guess that doesn't include California, but includes Washington. But what it does, a third nation, by the way, is Libya as well. Libya is, while no one is watching.
So Iraq, of course, that's why he's there pushing that. But Iran also, and oh, by the way, Libya, because we've got to get those guys. So 2 out of 3 already in hindsight. So one more on that list for us to take out. Former UN Weapons Inspector Scott Ritter is here to assess all of this and more. Scott, great to see you. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about, first of all, David Albright, former UN weapons inspector. Is he a former UN weapons inspector and he's now beating the drums? I find the timing of all of this very, very interesting, that Iran is about to have nuclear weapons. Maybe they already do, and we should probably hit them. We should probably attack them right now.
David Albright had a brief interaction with the International Atomic Energy Agency's Iraq inspection group. He was invited to participate in an inspection where they were reviewing documents that had been acquired after Hussein Kamal, the son-in-law, had defected. He's not an inspector. He has no inspection qualifications. He's an outside expert, in quotations we'll put, who came on one mission and has made a career of it afterwards, likening himself to people like myself who spent years planning missions, executing missions, and interacting with the international community about this. I just think if a guy has to falsify his resume to burnish his credentials, then you might want to think twice about the message. But let's focus on the message, not the messenger. This is a man who has been pushing for the violent disarmament of Iraq back in the day. He's a man who bought into defector Hider Hamza, gave him a platform to lie about Iraqi nuclear weapons capabilities. He promoted Hamza's efforts to say that Iraq was pursuing a nuclear weapons program, had a nuclear weapons program worthy of war. David Albright has the blood of thousands of Americans and millions of Iraqis on his hands. He's not an innocent academic. He's not an objective observer. He's an advocate for Israeli policies of regime change in the region. And he's been advocating for conflict against Iran for some time now. He has been at the front of selling a falsified Israeli narrative about Iranian nuclear intentions and capabilities. It's clear to anybody who has a modicum of expertise on Iran's nuclear program that Iran is not pursuing a military program. Iran has made a decision to do that which it is permitted to do under Article 4 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. I want to make that point to everybody. Iran is in violation of nothing. They're not even in violation of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, because the United States and Europe, the United States has backed out and Europe has failed to implement. So Iran has done what it is permitted to do in accordance with paragraphs written by the United States under the assumption that Iran would be the party in noncompliance. Iran is withdrawing from its obligations, until which time the United States and Europe abide by their commitments. Iran is violating no law. They're doing what they're permitted to do under Article 4. They're doing that which they would be permitted to do when the JCPOA reached maturity in any event. So this is not a push for nuclear weapons. This is David Albright, providing a background chorus, so to speak, for Benjamin Netanyahu's ongoing song of war against Iran.
I think that's fascinating, a background chorus, because I found the timing of this to be pretty interesting, right? At the moment we hear Iranian-backed groups attack American soldiers in these bases, which, by the way, why do we have so many of these bases scattered around in these illegally occupied areas, whether it's Syria or Jordan or all over the place, right? Even in the New York Times, the Biden administration has admitted that, it's only a matter of time before American forces in these regions are targeted or hit. Well, shocking. They've been telling us for years they don't want us there. Why are we in these areas illegally in the first place? So it's only a matter of time, and the Biden administration admits this. They're sitting ducks. It's almost like they're putting them out there on purpose as decoy pigeons or something, waiting for these Iranian-backed groups to attack us, and that's a justification for us to do something to Iran. Am I wrong about that? Maybe it's just my cynical nature.
Well, in this case, remember, the Biden administration inherited this forced posture. This is something that began under the Obama administration. Of course, Biden was the vice president, but it was continued under Trump. This is an American policy, not a Biden policy, and it's a policy that makes no sense. But the United States, we project force into regions under very dubious claims of legitimacy. We have no legitimacy to be on Syrian territory. We claim it's because we're seeking to destroy ISIS. But if you take a look at the Al-Tanf area 55, I think they call it, we're there to actually use ISIS-affiliated Syrian tribal groups against the Syrian government. This is about, destabilizing the government of Bashar al-Assad as part of a larger policy of regime change, again, which Biden has inherited from Trump, who inherited it from Obama. And it's a policy that has gone, basically, they've stopped actively pursuing it. So they're there doing nothing. That's the point I want to make. American forces are in this position illegally on Syrian territory, illegally. Everything they do is a war crime by definition. They're there with no mission, no viable mission. They've become nothing more than targets, not because the Biden administration wanted them to be targets, but because the Biden administration doesn't have the courage to do a policy review and say there's no reason for continued American presence. See, Americans, the government, we view it as a sign of weakness to do the right thing. If we say, oh, maybe it's time to get out, oh no, you'll be attacked as weak. And of course, Biden is running for president. He doesn't want to be seen as weak. The weakest thing an American president can do is allow American soldiers to die for no justification, no just cause. Joe Biden is the weakest president imaginable because not only have 3 American soldiers died, 34 wounded, but now he's talking about carrying out acts of retaliation that could expand this conflict. And if David Albright and Netanyahu get their way, it would mean a general war with Iran. And here's the kicker, which we would lose. We're not going to win this war. We can't even stop the Houthi from shutting down the Red Sea. The Iranians will shut down the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranians will destroy every piece of American military infrastructure in the region. All those F-22s and F-35s that sortie out of Qatar air bases, those bases will be destroyed. Those planes will be destroyed. This is the inevitable outcome. I can write it right now, just like I could write what happened to the Ukrainian counteroffensive. Any military expert who takes a look at the correlation of forces knows America is not postured to win. So why are we getting involved in a military conflict that the military professionals know we will lose? Presidential politics. Joe Biden is putting his political ambition above the sanctity of life of the American service members.
It's absolutely disgusting, because how do you tell the families of those 3 that were killed they were there illegally? Were they protecting America? Were they protecting America? Was it, Red Dawn? We were invaded, somebody at the southern border? No. They were there illegally. So to be able to go to the families of those 3 service members that were killed, the 34 that were wounded, and to say, they were They were
died
killed.
for a cause.
They died for a cause. What cause is that? The political ambitions
There
of
is
Joe
no
Biden.
cause.
It's
There is no
absolutely
cause.
disgusting.
Yeah.
And when you think about the larger mission now and what the Biden administration appears wants to do, I mean, you certainly have Lindsey Graham and other members of the Senate who in the past 48 hours have been all over Twitter, have been pushing out messages saying we need to hit the heart of Tehran. We need to wipe them off the map. Those are the words of Lindsey Graham. We need to target and hit them harder than they've ever been hit before. So we need to go right at Iran. Iran says we had nothing to do with this attack. And so they've been looking for this justification, to my mind, for decades. And now I don't know if this is the catalyst they'll use in order to do this. But this is the third of the members that they've been trying to take out. Iraq, Libya, this is the third. They've been wanting this one. So to me, is it an inevitability at this point, Scott, that they are going to go after Iran?
I don't think so. And I'll tell you why I don't think so. Because the U.S. military is not populated by idiots. There are professionals there who, regardless of their ideological motivations, they may, believe in a strong American posture in the Middle East. They may support the anti-ISIS mission in Syria, all that. But they are professionals. And so they will, it's like a firefighter whose job is to put out the burning building. But if I roll up on the building and I look at it and I look at the nature of construction, the spread of fire, the smoke coming out, I'm going to go, that building's a loss. I'm not putting any firefighters in that building. It doesn't mean that I don't want to fight fires. It means that I'm not going to fight this fire because this fire will kill me. I'm going to lose this fire. The military professionals right now are taking a look at the correlation of forces in the region. Remember, once you start a war with Iran, let's just start with basic strategic lines of communication. Iran will be operating off of interior lines of communication, meaning they'll be fighting from their own territory. We, on the other hand, are projecting power thousands of miles away from our soil, thousands of miles or hundreds of miles away from any known base of support. We don't have sufficient force projected forward to inflict any meaningful harm on Iran. We will blow up a couple places, but then they'll hit us with everything they got. They will destroy our forward deployed bases. The Al Ubaid Air Base in Qatar will be eliminated. The Fifth Fleet in Bahrain will be eliminated. Any ships in the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf will be eliminated and sunk. And there's not anything we can do about it. And then what? We're supposed to project power forward? What power? We don't have a Navy capable of projecting power forward anymore. We have nothing. We spend nearly $1 trillion a year to produce a military that can't do its job in Europe, can't do its job in Asia, can't do its job in the Middle East. Thank God. Because to do their job in Europe, we'd be at war with Russia. To do their job in the Pacific, we'd be at war with China. And to do their job in the Middle East, we would war with Iran. But we are weak. We are fundamentally weak. This is the danger of overdoing deterrence. It's one thing to flex your muscle with deterrence, but deterrence only works if the other side believes that you can follow through on the action that you're promising to do if they do something. What is becoming painfully clear to everybody is that the United States cannot follow through. Now, fortunately, Iran knows that even though the United States won't win a war with Iran, the United States can do sufficient harm to Iran. Iran is on the cusp of an economic recovery. They have a very bright future ahead of themselves. They're looking for peace, not war. This is why the Chinese helped broker reconciliation with China. This is why Iran is joining BRICS, joining the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They're looking for this great future of, economic growth and prosperity. The last thing they want to do is throw it away in a war. So Iran's not looking for this war. It's America looking for this war. Iran will do what is necessary to convince the Americans that this is not a war worth fighting. And hopefully the military professionals will be pounding on the Oval Office door telling Biden, can't do this, boss. If you start this conflict, it's not going to end the way you want it to. And, the military doesn't do politics, but maybe somebody on the National Security Council will say, this is the fastest way to guarantee that you will lose the election in November 2024, because you will be the wartime president who got his ass kicked by the Iranians.
Oh, from your mouth to God's ears. I hope that's the case. Positivity. Absolutely. I hope that that's the case. Scott, great to see you. Thanks as always for your insight and your analysis from a real UN weapons inspector. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. And, if you go back and watch an interview I did with Scott about 2 years ago, deep dive, where we talked about his past and we talked about the FBI and the CIA coming after him And when he had a member of the CIA basically told him, like, you better fall in line with what this administration wants you to do, or they're going to ruin your life. They're going to come after you, and they're going to ruin your life. And that's what they tried to do for a lot of years. They don't like that he speaks the truth. So, it's a fascinating history here. Someone in our chat room, Eric, let me see what Eric just said. Eric Lassen said, now it's rolling by me, said, you can bet that the Morrises don't make these hot takes at dinner, like around the dinner table, like that we don't talk about this stuff around the dinner table. This is a show for you, Eric says in our chat. And I just want to say something. First of all, you've never been to our dinner table. And second of all, this is exactly the kind of stuff that we talk about. Like
our poor children.
Our poor children. And when we're sitting there, when they're like, oh, we've heard about this thing about climate and like the oceans are rising and all this, like, we're like, let's talk to you. So we talk to our kids about this stuff. We try to educate them about what's happening around the world. When they see all the Ukrainian flags everywhere and all the propaganda around that, those were many, many long dinner conversations about the propaganda that these governments force down their throats. So yes, our poor children get to hear all of these things on a nightly basis. Not every night, but these are not like hot takes that we're just like putting out there for our show. These are things that we believe and read on a regular basis and study. And I wanted to, I took
well, even in our
with that.
personal.
For our team. Yeah, just for our internal team here at Redacted. Like, we're like, oh my God, did you see what Joy Reid just did? Caught on a hot microphone admitting the truth about the war and about the Biden administration. She was caught on a hot mic saying, oh, Biden, you're going to get us into another hot war. And then she comes back on camera and she goes right back into her narrative. And then she had to apologize for it. Like, that's literally something we were sharing amongst our group a few minutes ago. Go ahead, David.
Well, I was just going to say it's because we are actually passionate about the subjects that we cover. I mean, we go through, there are 1,000 different subjects we could choose every single day, and we go through and pick ones that we're really passionate about and care about. So,
yeah. The other day, my mom goes, oh, you're working so hard. Do you still want to do this? Are you sure you want to do this? And I'm like, Mom, this is what I'm qualified for. Yeah, Hermione Granger needs to do this.
You weren't a research assistant, getting your master's degree in studying this stuff, and
she's
to
like,
sit around
maybe you
and
should
do
relax
nothing.
a little. I'm like, I cannot.
Yeah. Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then I'm going to video call her every week and be like, let me tell you who's warmongering, Mom. She'll block me.
Yeah.
All
anyway,
right.
we
have more news to get to. Speaking of warmongering, we're going to talk about how NATO is doing that, how they want to usurp the idea of a European army. Who's going to run that? Who will it answer to?
Well,
is there any
Russia.
chance it would be peaceful? No, of course, it's under the Trojan horse of an alarmist war with Russia. We're also going to talk about the rise of hate science in Canada. We have an author coming up. I mentioned that I read this book over the weekend called Fistman's Fraud. I liked it. I'm going to tell you that if you are interested in how Canadians were tortured based on junk science, you will be interested in this book. And we're going to talk to the author, and I'm excited about that.
Can I just say something? A lot of people are saying we couldn't hear Philip. Can you guys not hear Philip? Are you muted or something?
Yeah, my bad. My bad.
Okay.
Oh, he told a really funny joke.
I forgot to. It was probably the funniest joke I've ever told. I mean, I'm still laughing. I don't know how you guys are keeping it together.
It's
professionalism.
Missed to history now.
Oh, well, it's an inside joke now. All right. Well, let us tell you about our sponsors today, because that's not an inside joke. And then we're going to tell you all about war in NATO and Canadian hate science. But first, whether you have 3 minutes in the morning or 30 minutes, you can keep your face wrinkle-free with Gen 90. That's the new wrinkle treatment from Genucel. It's the perfect Valentine's Day gift for yourself or your Valentine. Gen 90 instantly reduces the appearance of wrinkles anywhere you use it. Around the eyes, the forehead, the crow's feet, laugh lines, even the chin. It just starts working in seconds.
That's what I'm going to get you for Valentine's Day.
Oh.
And then I'm going to put a little card in there and be like, this is for your wrinkles. This is for your crow's feet.
For what my daughter calls my free Wi-Fi on my forehead. When I raise my eyebrows and it looks like free Wi-Fi signal. I can do it again if you want to take my camera. Here's free Wi-Fi.
This is right here. Can I point to it?
Yeah, you can.
All right. Free Wi-Fi.
Am I go like that?
Yeah. It's a free Wi-Fi signal.
And I can't really
You need
do it on
Genucell.
purpose. So you don't want free Wi-Fi on your forehead permanently, then yeah, you should be using Gen 90. Gen 90 technology is luxurious, nourishing, and silk smooth. And best of all, it starts working in seconds because there's a tingle every time, so you know it. That's the reason that Genucell has 400% customer loyalty, more than other skincare brands. There is a special Valentine's Day sale on right now at genucell.com. And of course, it's included in the bestseller package. So before you go overseas to get harsh procedures for thousands of dollars, try Gen 90 first. Make your fine lines and wrinkles disappear wherever they are and before you even leave the room. And for Valentine's Day, order Gen 90 with the most popular package for over 70% off. And you get free shipping and Valentine's spa box with every order. So right now, go to genucell.com/redacted. One more time, that's genucell.com/redacted. Free shipping on all orders. genucell.com/redacted. NATO is trying to cut the red tape to mobilize a European army by creating what they call a military Schengen. Would this be creation of the European army that so many bodies of power seem to want? Could they get away with this under the guise of anything other than the warning of an impending doomsday with a war with Russia? Jim Ferguson joins us today. He's a former parliamentary candidate and businessman. Also, he's the founder of Freedom Train International, a free speech platform, freedom all around platform. Thank you for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you on Redacted.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be on with you and Clayton and Natali. Thanks for having me.
So do you think that this is a military corridor? This is an attempt to create a European army because England and Britain would be dragged right back in to what they exited through Brexit, right?
Well, as you know, I was a Brexit parliamentary candidate. I fought in the European parliamentary elections and, of course, in the general election towards the end of 2019. We were fighting for Brexit. We got a kind of a Brexit, but what nobody knew at that point, or at least not very many people knew, certainly the public weren't aware of it, is that Theresa May, the former Prime Minister, had already done a deal with members of the European Union, or I should say the members of the European Commission, because people like Thierry Breton and others had made it very clear that you can have your vote for Brexit, but as far as your military is concerned, as far as your intelligence services are concerned, we want to take that over. And she agreed. And instead of it being sort of classed as a separate European army, what they're cleverly doing is they're taking over their member states' militaries, and they also want to take over Britain's military. But it gets worse, Natali, because they're not just looking for all three strands of our military, the British Army, the Royal Navy, and the Royal Air Force. They want our security apparatus as well. They want control of MI6, and they want control of MI5, GCHQ, our listening post in Cheltenham, and they even want control of our entire policing services as well. And they want to add that to a new rising power in Europe that is controlled effectively by Ursula von der Leyen. And I said some months ago that this was actually happening, and I warned that there would be conscription for the British people. And just within the last few days, we've had politicians in the Conservative government coming out and saying, yeah, we might need to have a civilian army. We might need to call up people. We've got this terrible war with Russia that's coming. Well, no, we don't. Russia is not interested in going to war with NATO. They're not interested in going to war with Britain. It seems that the globalists that are in charge of our respective countries, including Sunak and Hunt, these are the prime ministers and the chancellor in the United Kingdom, as well as other member states of NATO, that are run by globalists. Yes, they do want to have a war with Russia. They've completely failed in Ukraine, but they're not going to leave it at that. They're going to drag everybody else into what I see coming as a military conflict.
So should we make a distinction between this NATO move and the European Union move, or do you think they're one and the same, sort of two sides of the same coin?
Well, what they're doing is they're looking at winding down NATO, but they can't wind down NATO until they have the new European military alignment. And by the way, this is known as military integration, or PESCO. And this has been known about by quite a number of people. But what a lot of the Tory grandees, the Conservative grandees that went along with this initially they thought they were going to get defence contracts for their own constituencies. That's not actually what's going to happen, because the integration is going to give the European Union one purpose only, and that is to decide where the bombs and the guns and the bullets and the tank rounds are going to get manufactured. They will have one procurement source and one only, and it won't be in Britain. And indeed, it gets worse than that, because they will decide who gets the order of supply. So Britain might find themselves very, very far at the back of the line, as our friends in America call it, or the back of the queue, as us Brits call it. And it's a bad move for Britain. It also means that German or French generals, or those involved in the new command structures, will actually be deciding where British troops are sent. And our parliament, our sovereign parliament, and our people would have effectively no say in the matter, and could, in fact, be called up to fight the Russians.
Right. Just yesterday, over the weekend, actually, Zelensky gave an interview in the German media saying, Germany, we got them. Like, they're on our side. They do what we want. And so Germany controls Europe. So the rest of Europe is good. What they're worried about now is American politics. So that shows the temperature of how the rest of Europe would go, because Zelensky is so close to Germany. Just over the last few days, NATO's European Logistic Chief, Lieutenant General Alexander Solfrank, advocated for this military Schengen. He called it a military corridor where, throughout Europe, we could just pass along some bullets and bombs. But what gave me pause was he also said personnel. And so who then is in charge of a Schengen-wide military? And would that pull back in England?
Yeah, absolutely, because the people that are running our government is called the Conservative Party, but they're only Conservative in name only. I'm a former Conservative parliamentary candidate, and I know that they are completely infiltrated by World Economic Forum globalists who take their orders and policies and instructions from Klaus Schwab and the other globalist institutions, being the World Health Organization and the United Nations. So yes, absolutely, they want war with Russia, and they are very willing to sacrifice as many people as they can to get their goals done. But I actually been watching the rollout and the comments of all the talk that's been going on. I don't think the people in Britain are wanting a war. I don't think they're ready for it. And as a lot of people are saying, if these globalists really want a war so much, let globalists like Richie Sunak pick up a rifle, and Grant Shapps and all these other warmongers, let them go and fight the Russians and see how they get on. Send their sons and their daughters to fight and die in a battlefield somewhere. The ordinary people in Russia, the ordinary people in the United Kingdom are not enemies. It's the globalists who are causing this. And the reason they are so against Russia is because Vladimir Putin didn't go along with their new world order. He was part of it until he realized that he would have to sacrifice Mother Russia on the altar of globalism. And he walked away and said, no, he stands with his own people. That's why they dislike him so much, and that's why they won't let it drop. It's a power struggle, a global power struggle that's in play here. And there are many and complex factors to it. But of course, ultimately, in any war, it's the people themselves who suffer and die. And that, to me, is completely unacceptable.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. And so I feel like people are increasingly rejecting this Russia's the bad guy. We are going to war with Russia. And as it seems to me, the people reject it, politicians are screaming it louder and louder. And the media is totally complicit. Just today, there was a Wall Street Journal article that blew my mind, saying 3 ways that the United States could retaliate against Iran. It was not an opinion piece. It was presented as news. Like, here's what we need to do next for war. I can't wrap my head around it. What do you think the temperature is in the UK about accepting or rejecting a war with Russia?
Oh, I have no doubt about it that the vast majority of people would be very much against it. The globalists are trying very hard to sell it, and they are failing. Even David Cameron, the former British Prime Minister, had to go back on maybe 2 or 3 days later and say, oh, well, we didn't really mean conscription. We didn't really mean we were going to call up our young men and women and send them off to get slaughtered on the fields of Ukraine. But that's exactly what they meant. Let's not be under any shadow of a doubt. And you are absolutely right. I mean, it's news channels like Redacted that get the truth out. And I pay tribute to you and to Clayton for the work that you're doing, because without you, the mainstream media would control the narrative. They are bought and paid for by the globalists, people like Bill Gates, people like George Soros. They're all involved, and they control the narrative. But I actually believe they're losing the information war. And it's directly tied into the fact that at the last World Economic Forum Davos meetings, their primary focus wasn't on stopping war or curing cancer or stopping world hunger. No, it was misinformation and disinformation. In other words, if you have a different viewpoint or a different narrative, they want to close you down. They want to censor you. And that's why Freedom Train International is pushing back so hard in multiple countries. We're pushing for the truth. We're pushing back against the globalists. We don't want war. We want peace and prosperity for people. We've seen enough conflict, but it's time that the globalists were removed from our governments, because they are causing nothing but problems for everybody, regardless of which country they have infiltrated.
Right. So it matters absolutely, what information you consume, what information you share, and who you vote for at this point, because people currently in power are marching to the beat of the war drum. And thank you for saying those nice things about Redacted, and thank you for your time. It's always wonderful to talk to you. You can follow Jim Ferguson on X, and also your site, Freedom Train. Let me get it right. You say it. It's freedomtraininternational.org. Is that correct?
That's spot on, yeah. And Jim Ferguson UK, so it's at Jim Ferguson UK on X. And I say these compliments because I mean them, and you guys really do some great news posts and recordings, and I watch you guys all the time. So I'm always very pleased to be on with you. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for coming on Redacted. See you again soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jim. Very kind of Jim to say that. And
that was nice.
Follow Jim on X, and he's always a very wise, astute, an eye on the world, calling out BS when he sees it. So he's a great follow and a great journalist. Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it. As a businessman and entrepreneur, and a keen eye on what's happening in the world. One of our chatters just here a moment ago, Adrian, said, "Forgive my ignorance, but what is the Schengen zone? What is Schengen?" And there's nothing to be wrong about. No one ever has to apologize. I think it takes a brave person to say, I don't know something. So when we're talking about the Schengen zone,
it's the European trade bloc.
I was going to answer
ahead.
it, but,
yeah.
So
you're not asking me.
No, I wasn't asking you. So it's a small town in Luxembourg where it was written in 1985, where they came up with the Schengen Agreement. So there's 23 EU countries that are part of it, 27 countries total. So there are 4 countries that are not part of the EU that are in the Schengen zone. Mm-hmm. And it's a trade agreement. Yeah, that's what it simply means. Right. It's just basically a free trade agreement.
It's similar to the way that you can ship or sell something from, let's say, Idaho to California. The same rules would apply for trade inside European countries that otherwise wouldn't. So
they signed it in 1985 in Schengen, in this small town, and then they did another version of it in 1990. So yeah.
So what gives me pause about that news is that they want a military Schengen, not just to, like I said, ship bombs and bullets, but people sharing militaries, right? Mm-hmm. We know NATO already does that, but this idea of a military expansion under one NATO unit, or worse, Ursula von der Leyen, gives me pause, clearly.
Could you imagine Ursula von der Leyen? She looks like she could be like an evil villain, like a Despicable Me movie, like that would run the army. Like she puts on a nice front, but behind the scenes, of course, she's launching all sorts of crazy vaccine policies and going to launch wars around the world trying to attack Russia. That's Ursula von der Leyen. We've got more news to get to here on your Taco Tuesday. We're going to look at the science of hate in Canada. And we're also going to talk about, something has happened over the past few years. Embalmers around the world, those who prepare bodies for funeral services, have been noticing something very, very strange. White, fibrous blood clots. in the past 2 years? What's going on there? Why in the past 2 years? Yeah, we're going to speak with a data scientist and a major in the U.S. Air Force, retired, who noticed something odd as well and decided to take matters into his own hands, and Thomas Haviland, and started to reach out to all of these embalmers around the country and around the world to find out, are you seeing this as well? We're going to have the results of his study. We're going to sit down and talk with him today, just coming up a little bit later in the show. But first,
we want to tell you about our friends over at the Wellness Company because, as you know, the government's goal is dependency and control of our lives. If you have thought about what your emergency plan would be, if the government continues to control your lives and control your access to resources, things that you might need. For instance, pharmaceuticals, 90% of them are produced outside of the U.S. So what happens in a global crisis? What happens in worst case scenario, which sometimes feels like is pending? The price of medications are on the rise and pharmacy shelves are empty. Well, not if the Wellness Company can do anything about it, because they want you to be prepared. They make a medical emergency kit that holds 8 life-saving medications that every American should keep in their medicine cabinet. It's like having a doctor at home. The kit contains antibiotics, antivirals, and antiparasitics, plus a 22-page guidebook with instructions on safe usage. From tick bites to COVID to extreme bioterror events, every scenario is covered in the book. So it's up to you now. We're telling you one way to protect your family, to keep yourself stocked. It's important to look into it. No matter what your plan is, it's important to just have one. So check out the Wellness Company. Head on over to twc.health/redacted and grab yours before they're gone. That's twc.health/redacted. Using our code redacted saves you 10% at checkout. Be safe, be prepared, have a plan, and stay well. These kits are only available in the USA. Again, that's twc.health/redacted. Canada stripped away freedoms and tortured the unvaccinated based on hate science, which is not science at all. That is what one author says in her new book, Fissman's Fraud. Dr. Regina Wattiel joins us today. She's a Canadian statistician who took the time to read the studies that the media and the Canadian government was using to implement pandemic policy, and she found she could not, in fact, follow the science, no matter how hard she tried. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Natalie. Glad to be here.
Yes, I finished your book over the weekend, and I want to lay this out briefly so that our audience explains how you got there and just how serious this is in terms of academic misinformation. So in 2022, Canada insisted on keeping strict restrictions and vaccine requirements on its population, even though the science was beginning to show that the vaccine did not impact the transmission of COVID. And then right on cue, this study pops up saying that the unvaccinated are a threat to the vaccinated and responsible for the pandemic raging on. The media picks it up. Politicians use it to implement policy. It's a big hit. But you, in fact, read it and realized that it's not based on population data, which was available, but instead a mathematical model. And you hit the roof. You became what I call a dog with a bone. I love it. You went to the journal, the university, and even the police to point out this fraud. So take me through it, how you got here, and why it set your hair on fire so much.
Okay, well, the problem, the big part of the reason why I went after this is because my family was really impacted by the mandates and the restrictions. So in the fall of 2021, what we had here in Canada, we had vaccine passports. So the unvaccinated were banned from most public venues, restaurants, gyms, movie theaters. The universities most of them were, in order for university students to go on campus, they had to be vaccinated. And then the federal government had its vaccine mandates on federal workers. So in order to work, they had to be vaccinated, and they had to also impose travel restrictions. So we couldn't even travel by plane or train within our own country. It was a very isolating and very hard time for millions of Canadians. And then what happened in December and at Christmas of 2021 is we had the Omicron surge. And so the COVID-19 cases soared to record heights despite the vaccines. 80% of the population was vaccinated. Still, we had these record surges, not only in cases, but in hospitalizations. And instead of admitting that these vaccines did not curb transmission, and instead of admitting failure, the government basically doubled down and started imposing even more restrictions. And so that was December 21 and in January 2022. And at the time, they were even imposed additional restrictions on unvaccinated truckers. So the world recalls that sparked the trucker convoy, the Freedom Convoy. And so the Freedom Convoy came in and it put a lot of pressure on the provinces to relent on their passports and on the federal government to end their mandates and travel restrictions. So out of desperation, the federal government, Trudeau's government, imposed the Emergencies Act, where they basically trampled on the protesters and froze bank accounts and that type of thing, in order to, stop the momentum, in order to salvage their restrictions. But they needed to do more. They needed the science. And so this is where FSMN comes in, because when you look at the actual government of Ontario data, Ontario is the largest province here in Canada. When you look at our data, the government's own data, it showed that the cases, the COVID cases, were dominated by the vaccinated, and that the vaccinated actually had higher incident rates than the unvaccinated. So, yeah, Trudeau was in desperate need of science and justification for his mandates. So in comes FSMN and his colleagues. And what FSMN does is he and his colleagues concoct a model to simulate fake data that shows the opposite of what the real data shows. Fake data that shows that it's the unvaccinated that have higher COVID-19 rates. And then they tried to pass off their fake results as fact. And they use this, fake results to scapegoat the unvaccinated, to provide justification for the federal government's mandates and restrictions. And then media ran with it. Media ran with it, warning everybody of the risk of merely hanging out with unvaccinated Canadians.
Which is so upsetting, because if you look at the study, they don't even use COVID-19 data at all. They say we simulated a respiratory infectious disease. And so the media should have known this is a simulation. They didn't seem to care. They just started running headlines that you put a compendium in your book of the list of headlines about how you're putting people at risk by going to the gym or getting on a train or an airplane or anything like that. So, it's a complete lack of duty by the media, but we sort of expect that. But the politicians who used it to implement policy is, I want to say, more upsetting. You seem upset by all of it, so you can tell me what you find the most upsetting.
Well, right away, when I looked at the study, I was well aware of what the data actually showed, so I knew right away that it was bogus. But it just wasn't going away. Everybody was running with it, and it was so clearly fraudulent. What I found most the worst was when the academic institutions, the research institutions, would not retract the study or set the record straight. They allowed it to continue, and that's really when I realized how corrupted the system is. It's not just the government here. The government is like Trudeau's government is there's a scandal every hour. It's terrible. And unfortunately, the courts are more than happy to look the other way. But by going through all the, trying to get the paper retracted and going through the different organizations, I realized how deeply involved the research institutions themselves were. And this was overt fraud. It was used to scapegoat the unvaccinated and prop up these horrible mandates. And they knew, and they did nothing. And in fact, when you look at their involvement, especially the Journal, it looked like they were actively involved in that deception. So,
Right. So you uncovered that the lead author, Fisman, has been on the payroll of Moderna and was given promotions. So was the university that published the paper. They were later given money by the Canadian government in order to continue to research the pandemic. Can you explain that conflict of interest and how that was not disclosed to the public?
well, actually, a lot of these conflicts of interest are very public. So you look at David Fisman, and he's basically Canada's front man for pandemic modeling. So he was involved in modeling right in the beginning, and he advised all levels of government, municipal, provincial, federal. And during this time, he has a lot of connections to various pharmaceutical companies. He served on a lot of advisory boards. And the university itself, University of Toronto, was in partnership with Moderna. They announced a big partnership with Moderna weeks before Fisman's study came out. And they've, all universities here, a lot of universities in Canada received a lot of grant money from the government to combat things like vaccine hesitancy. So these things were actually pretty well known here. It's pretty open conflict of interest.
Now, you went bit by bit to people to get this retracted, to the medical journal, the University of Toronto, I believe, and even the fraud department. I guess you would call it the Canadian version of the FBI, right? Can you tell us what happened at each one of those?
Right. So first I went to the journal because they published the study, and I asked for a retraction. And the journal it wasn't just me who went to the journal. Dozens of researchers and scientists in Canada asked for corrections to be made and that paper to be retracted. But they pretty much ignored me. So I went to the University of Toronto, and University of Toronto has its own department for dealing with research integrity. So they had to they had to engage in dialogue with me. And at first they just tried to deny that they could deal with what Fisman did. So I actually had to go through their guidelines, research guidelines, and show them exactly in the policy where it shows that they have to do something. And then they just tried to deflect it. And then when I went back to them, absolute proof this was fraud, backed them into a corner, and they just closed the file. So at that point, I went to the funding agency because this research was funded by the Canadian government. It was funded through CIHR. So I asked them to investigate the researchers and to set the record straight because it had been used in our parliament to justify extending the travel restrictions. And what happened with CIHR is the president of CIHR, along with the presidents of NSERC and another department, they got together and they voted not to set the record straight and to not investigate. And at that point, I had been doing a lot of research into these organizations, and I felt I had enough evidence to ask for a police investigation. So I wrote a 150-page evidentiary report, and I sent it to the Ontario Provincial Police, their anti-rackets branch, and asked for an investigation. So they were not open to that.
Yes, you mentioned that the person you sat down with said, I've had 4 vaccines, I'm fine, everyone's fine, this is not a big deal. So can you lay out why this was a big deal? Not just, I couldn't go to the gym, but how there are recurring harms that happened. One, because the vaccine was not properly tested. And so we didn't have a risk-benefit analysis of taking the vaccine. We didn't have informed consent. And 2, because of the way that the unvaccinated were scapegoated and kept from their freedoms.
Right. So there's a lot to unpack there because the vaccines, there's issues with them on a lot of levels. So Fisman's study dealt mostly with transmission. And so my book does knock that down a lot because it was obvious it doesn't curtail transmission at all. And without that, there really is no justification for mandates. And I go with that because if you have a potentially unsafe drug on the market, at least a potentially lethal, drug, the best line of defense is to simply not take it. So if they take that right away and you're forced to take it, then you really don't have any defense against this. So in Canada, they made life unbearable for the unvaccinated. It wasn't just I couldn't go to the movies and I couldn't go to the gym, or my kids, couldn't go to restaurants. My two oldest were in university at the time, and they were varsity level athletes. Both of them were banned from the university campus. They were both kicked out of varsity sports. They've never competed again. It destroyed their varsity sports completely. And they were big athletes. They made it to nationals right before the pandemic was called. My youngest was isolated from everything. My husband, he's a federal employee, so the mandates affected him, and so he didn't work for most of 2022. My sister, she got fired from her position as a heart technician. I mean, it was devastating. And it completely changed our life, but not just our life. Millions of people suffered under this and are still suffering. And when I went to, I took part in the trucker convoy. I went to that protest 13 times. It was so uplifting because you had so many people together who finally had hope, that something was going to be done. And I met a lot of people who suffered. I met people who were vaccinated and they were injured. And, a lot of stories came out of that. So it was devastating. It's been very difficult here in Canada. And FSMA's study, sorry, do you want to?
No. Go ahead. Please go ahead.
I was just saying that FSMA's study didn't just scapegoat the unvaccinated. It didn't just justify the mandates that were happening at the time. You could see that it was laying down the foundation for future mandates. It was giving you the framework for the pseudoscience as to why we should be able to mandate vaccines, not just now, but in the future. And I found that. So I feel I have to do something in order for my children to have a future here.
Yeah. Okay. I want to ask you one more question, and then I want to direct our viewers to, this will continue as a redacted conversation over on our community at redacted.inc. I want you to just, before we continue this conversation, define what you mean by hate science and what you think that the average person can do about it.
So a hate science, I'm looking at, fraudulent science done for the purpose of harming a specific group of individuals. So in this case, we had fabrication and falsification for the purpose of scapegoating unvaccinated Canadians and basically taking away their rights and freedoms. So that was the purpose behind the science.
Okay.
Yeah. And what we can do about it, what I've shown, and it's pretty clear here, is that the establishment is not going to investigate itself. The establishment is not going to stop doing what it's doing. So I think it's up to individuals and grassroots movements to do something about what is going on here. So I'm kind of hoping that my book, exposes what's going on, but also gives people a sense of, validation and empowerment to do something the way I have.
Yeah, it's a really interesting read. I think that anyone who's interested in understanding how we've been collectively manipulated, Canada, one of the worst, will enjoy this book. So thank you for writing it and bringing it to my attention. We're going to continue this over on as a redacted conversation. So on this live platform tonight, I'm going to thank you for joining us. And then we'll continue the conversation after the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you.
And I want to say, so many people in our chat, thank you to the doctor. So many people in our chat room right now are saying, I saw William Garrity said, thank you, Canada, for this amazing hero. Yeah, we should all be applauding this doctor. She is a hero. I mean, think about the tenacity that she had to call out the fraud of what these people were doing to people. I mean, I get chills just thinking about it. And I would hope everyone right now, you can even donate it to a library. Go and buy her book. We're not like an affiliate or anything like that. Just go and buy her book wherever you want to buy it. It's called FSMA's Fraud. Let's make it like a #1 bestseller. It's like $6.99 the paperback. Fisman's Fraud, Fisman, Fisman's Fraud. You can find it. Go and buy it right now. Let's see if we can like shoot it up the charts on Amazon.
Now, one thing, I have some outstanding questions that I'm going to ask her when we talk later in the redacted conversation. For instance, why not a lawsuit? Force these doctors to show why they faked their data.
Yeah.
Were they already on a foregone conclusion writing this story? Why did they make their changes? She shows you, she goes through early review drafts, and initially they didn't use the word people because they seemed like they knew that they couldn't apply this to populations. And then they added it in like 80 times in order to deceive, right? So I would love to see discovery in a lawsuit like that. And also, I can tell when I go to look for a book like this, Amazon doesn't want me looking. There are just signs, right? When you're not supposed to look for a book and you find it.
They suppress it
the
in search
algorithm
results.
is not her friend here. She has admitted that, she's not allowed to advertise the book because of the content. So, she just reached out to me, said, I think you're the kind of person who might actually read this book. And I said, sure, I will read it.
Yes.
And I read it.
You've come to the right show.
Yeah. And so I read it, cover to cover. And I think that it's worth reading for all of us to see exactly what if you're Canadian, your tax dollars funded this book, funded this study that was used to hurt you. So, you definitely should be aware of this. All of us should.
It's like when Dr. Peter McCullough reached out to our show and he's like, would you guys want to read this book and his book on COVID? And I was like, yes, we would. And then we'll have Dr. McCullough on the show, and he's become a good friend of the show. So go ahead, David.
I was just going to say, just think about the vulnerable position that she put herself in going against the government. We know what the Trudeau government is capable of. We saw with the truckers and everything, yet she didn't care and she went out there anyway. And that's like the true definition of bravery for me, to see somebody that's willing to take on a whole governmental system in order to get real information out for us.
Well, they're censoring so many people, right? As I'm watching this interview and I'm sitting here listening to Natalie's interview here, and I'm like looking at the chat room and people are like, oh, YouTube is censoring our comments. YouTube is censoring our comments. And yes, that's exactly what happens. In fact, the other day I went in, holds comments for review and go in and find that they've like censored hundreds of people's comments. We don't do that. That's not us. And so this is what we're up against. Her book, like Amazon won't let her advertise it because it would violate their advertising policies, so they can't advertise it. It's suppressed in search algorithms. Like, this is what we're up against.
Black Tie in the chat says, request it your local library, make them order it, and see if they do.
Do it. Yeah. Again, it's called Fisman's Fraud. Go buy it on Amazon. You can read it, obviously. That'd be great. And then, or just donate it to your local library also, or force them to like order it so that people see this book in local libraries. And that would be great to see this rocketing up the charts, the power of Redacted. I would love that.
And I would be surprised if a library wouldn't order it, because like it's been my experience. I used to work in the university library system way back when at Ball State. But that's like the biggest proponents of free speech that I've ever met are librarians. They're the kind of people that are like, we need all information out there. And, it's up to you, the reader, to decide. Like, I've never met a librarian that's like, we should be censoring free speech.
Yeah.
That's just my hot take on it.
I have. I volunteer in libraries. I've heard some of that.
Anyway, people in the chat are saying, what's the name of the book again? What's the name of the book? I'll give it to you one more time, and then you can go back and rewatch the segment as well. But it's Fisman's Fraud, Fisman.
And specifically, what she wants us to see is the study that the media ran away with that was funded by Canadian taxpayers through the government, called the impact of population mixing between vaccinated and unvaccinated. And what they did was just fake a model, even though they had readily available population data, and used it to say that the unvaccinated were a risk, a threat, a public health threat to the vaccinated. And the media and politicians said, well, then you can't get on a train with my daughter who's vaccinated. You can't go to the gym. You can't go to school, even though the data at the time started to really show that the vaccine was not affecting transmission of COVID-19. We know that now. That aged poorly, but these doctors have since been promoted. So, read it for yourself. And let us know if you think that your government is operating with hate science. I hate the term.
And I think, Philip, you just got the asset here, right? You want to show it? Or no?
Yeah, I had pulled it. I'm trying to work on it. I'd already pulled it, so hang on. I'm working on it so we can get it. My thing's not working super well.
Thank you so much.
Your thing's not working, huh?
Yeah, that's what they tell me.
Yeah.
Give me a second.
All right, we'll show you one more time.
It's not an easy thing when we switch these things out. So try doing it like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
All right, so here is the book title if you're looking for it.
Yeah, there it is.
Like we said, the algorithm in bookstores are not her friend.
Well, so many people in our chat just said they went and bought it. Way to go. Agent 07 Melissa just went and bought the book. Awesome. Caroline says Amazon Canada is selling the paperback for $25.
Oh. Okay.
You know what? For this mom's hard work, for this doctor's hard work, I'd pay $25 for this book in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Yeah, and get it in hardback. Get it in a nice hardback book, and then take it to your local library so people can. We need more books like this. Certainly.
Take it to your local bookbinder and have them make you a special leather-bound copy with an engraved front on it.
Yeah.
All right, we've got more news to get to. So our next interview here, we're not going to be able to do it on this platform on YouTube. Okay. So where we are going to go next is the link at the bottom of your screen. We are going to continue and do this next interview with Major Thomas Haviland, United States Air Force retired, who found out about something that was happening with embalmers and said, you know what, I want to find out more about this. This is another hero. Okay, we just had one hero. Here's another hero for you on this evening. But we cannot do this interview on YouTube because they will block us and ban us. So we are going to do it exclusively on this next platform here, and down below. That's where we're going to do it. And we'll also be streaming on X as well. And so we're going to talk about these blood clots and why mysteriously have they been creeping up over the past few years. We're going to hear from embalmers, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But first, we want to tell you about how you can right now get some nice savings on your cash that's maybe sitting in your bank account right now. And our friends over at Moomoo, our favorite trading platform, have just rolled out. They have a limited time right now, this new cash sweep account, which will give you 8.1% interest for a limited time. Just right now, the 3% is added on to the 5%. So that's just a 3-month limited part of it. But the base price is 5.1% interest. The 3% is just a 3-month bonus right now, if you open an account and make your initial deposits in this account. Now, it's a trading app. So you can buy stocks if you want. You can buy commodities. I personally invest in like metals companies and commodities. Some people were asking me last night, what do you invest in? I do. I invest in uranium companies. That's what I like to do. I like to invest in the companies that are actually doing the hard work and pulling the minerals out of the ground that we need to live our lives. I'm not one of these climate activists who, thinks that we can operate on solar farms and wind. So I invest in things that we need, like uranium, and I invest in gold and silver. And you can do all of that inside of the Moomoo trading platform. But the best part is when you open an account, you get 15 free stocks just for opening the account. And any of the cash that you're sitting there waiting to deploy to make an investment, like for instance, the Fed has their big meeting tomorrow. So I'm not deploying any capital right now. I'm going to wait until they speak tomorrow and what will happen with interest rates over the next 24 to 48 hours. Are they going to lower interest rates? Are they going to raise interest rates? So I'm not deploying any capital. I'm sitting on my powder. I'm keeping my powder dry, and I'm waiting. But in the meantime, that money is earning interest in that cash sweep account. So anyway, the best way to do it is go to redacted.inc/Moomoo. Sign up today. Get 15 free stocks when you sign up. Again, redacted.inc/Moomoo. Get 15 free stocks when you sign up. All right, everyone. So we're going to say goodbye to our YouTube audience tonight because our next story we have to do on this platform right here, a free speech platform, censorship free. So good night, YouTube. Thank you so much for being here. We'll be back here tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern time. But for those of you that want to watch this next interview about what these embalmers have been finding, you want to come over and join us here. So good night, YouTube.